There's a very powerful moment during the 1000 Year Blood War arc which changes everything that we know about Ichigo's powers. Within Uetsu Nimaya's palace, Ichigo enters the Chamber of the Asauchi, or in other words, the nameless Zanpakuto, as he attempts to imprint his soul onto one of them. During Ichigo's second attempt, something unprecedented happens as every single Asauchi kneels at the same time. This even surprises Uetsu Nimaya, the creator of all Zanpakuto. This moment visually represents the complicated growth of Ichigo's powers. When we at first met White, or Ichigo's inner hollow, many of us had treated him as a typical alter ego character type, the crazed inverted doppelganger who has an unsettling laugh and a menacing grin. But Kubo, however, subverts our expectations as it is finally revealed that Hollow Ichigo is in fact his true Zanpakuto spirit Zangetsu. It's interesting to compare the growth of Ichigo's powers and his relationship with his Zanpakuto with other Shinigami like Renji, who follows the traditional path of a Shinigami, but Ichigo's journey to unlocking his true power is unlike anything that we have ever seen, as the journey to awakening his full potential culminates in the chapters titled The Blade Is Me. In this video, I'm going to be deep diving into this iconic moment where Ichigo was finally able to get his inner hollow to bow down to him and accept him. We'll be talking about the true nature of Hollow Ichigo, the significance behind his speech about the king and the horse, and how Ichigo's journey of self-acceptance results in his inner hollow bowing to him. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll completely understand why this moment is so critical for the growth of Ichigo. So without further delay, let's find out why Ichigo's inner hollow had bowed to him. Before the video begins, only 20% of the people who actually watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. Unlike normal Zanpakuto spirits, White was not born from Ichigo's soul. He had in fact originated as an experimental hollow that was created by Sosuke Aizen. This was a prototype that was designed with a very specific purpose. The backstory behind White is revealed within the Everything But the Rain flashback arc, as we learn that White was the first hollow created using a Shinigami soul, making it fundamentally different from other naturally occurring hollows. White is covered in a jet black armor, donning a white mask, and its appearance was deceiving, as Aizen explained. Despite the outer darkness, what lays within is purely white. The experimental hollow went on to attack Isshin, and it had eventually bitten Ichigo's mother Masaki. At the time she was a Quincy, but this bite had tainted her and had started the process of hollowification. The hollow had become a part of her soul as she started to undergo soul suicide. In order to save Masaki, Urahara had created a special Gigai which was bound to the Shinigami powers of Isshin. This was done in order to suppress the hollowification. During this time, White had resided within Masaki, possibly in a dormant state. But when Ichigo was born, White had transferred from Masaki over to him, and it had fused with Ichigo's inherited Shinigami powers that he had received from his father. This fusion had created something unprecedented which had transcended the barriers between a Shinigami and a hollow, as it had resulted in a being that was both a hollow and a Shinigami spirit at the same time. This dual nature made White not just an inner hollow, but Ichigo's true Zanpakuto spirit all along, a truth that we wouldn't come to learn until the 1000 Year Blood War arc. So by understanding his origins, we can appreciate that Hollow Ichigo wasn't a corrupting influence or a demon that needed to be suppressed. He was a core part of what made Ichigo who he was. This brings us to the iconic quote, "What's the difference between a king and his horse?" This question was posed to Ichigo by his inner hollow during the Vizar training. The relationship between a king and a horse describes the power dynamics that exist between Ichigo and his inner hollow. As he continues, "I don't mean that it's some sort of kiddie thing like one's a person and one's an animal, or one has 2 legs and one has 4. If their form, ability and power were the same, why is it that one becomes the king and controls the battle, while the other becomes the horse and carries the king?" Hollow Ichigo explains that there is only one answer, it is instinct. His inner hollow wants Ichigo to be the king of his inner world, with himself as the horse which lends his power to him, but this arrangement is conditional. Hollow Ichigo will only serve a king who is worthy of his power. Throughout Bleach, his inner hollow tests Ichigo, pushing him beyond his limits, forcing him to confront his weaknesses and fears. He doesn't accept Ichigo's authority simply because Ichigo is the original consciousness here. He demands that Ichigo needs to earn his respect through strength and resolve. While outwardly it seems like a lot of Hollow Ichigo's tests are sadistic challenges, but as we see during Ichigo's fight with Kinpachi, his inner Hollow had taught him about the true relationship between a Shinigami and their Zanpakuto. In the battle against Byakuya, White had demonstrated techniques like Black Getsuga Tensho, which Ichigo would later adopt, and even during the Vizard training, White had given Ichigo an ultimatum, as he had bluntly told him, well, you need to get stronger or else you're going to get replaced. Despite White's threatening and antagonistic behavior, he repeatedly has protected Ichigo in moments of mortal danger. Look back at the Soul Society arc. When Byakuya was about to deliver a fatal blow, his inner Hollow had appeared and caught the blade, stating that I can't let you die. During the battle against Ukiura, after Ichigo had a hole blasted through his chest, his inner Hollow had taken over his body, not only rapidly regenerating his mortal wound, but also defeating an enemy which Ichigo was unable to overcome. These were not just acts of self-preservation, they demonstrated that there was a deeper connection between Ichigo and his inner Hollow. Before Ichigo's full Hollow Vastolore transformation, he yells out, "I will protect you." Some fans have theorized that this was actually his inner Hollow saying this to Ichigo before he had transformed into the full Hollow form. The dynamic between a king and his horse isn't just about dominance, it's about mutual respect and understanding. A horse will willingly carry a worthy king, and a good king will recognize the value of his horse. This metaphor perfectly sets the stage for the eventual harmony and balance that Ichigo would need to achieve with all aspects of his powers, since he is a hybrid being with Shinigami, Quincy, Fullbring, and Hollow powers. Ichigo's relationship with his inner Hollow was riddled by fear and rejection from the very beginning. The reason for this is deeply personal and it's rooted in trauma. Ichigo had lost his mother to what he believed was a Hollow attack, and he had harbored an instinctive hatred towards anything Hollow related. When he discovered a Hollow entity within himself, he immediately responded with rejection and suppression. He didn't want to borrow powers if they had originated from a Hollow. This internal conflict manifests physically during the Arrancar arc as his inner Hollow's influence grows stronger, threatening to overtake Ichigo during battles. Ichigo had seen these episodes not as access to greater power, but as a dangerous aspect of himself which could cause him to lose control. His overall fear of his Hollow taking over led him to the Vizards, who had started to train him on how to subjugate his Hollow rather than training him to accept this part of himself and to work alongside with it. Ichigo had defeated his inner Hollow in order to momentarily gain control of its power rather than accepting it as a part of himself during his Vizard training. Ichigo's rejection of White severely limited his potential during the Arrancar arc. While he could temporarily don the Hollow mask following his Vizard training, it was the time limit that was associated with his Hollow powers which had given us a hint that Ichigo still is rejecting this part of himself. Each time he had donned the Hollow mask, the markings on the mask had changed, reflecting his evolving but yet conflicting relationship with his inner Hollow. Following his transformation against Ukiura, where he had fully manifested into a full Hollow resembling White, Ichigo became even more fearful of his Hollow powers, seeing them as monstrous and uncontrollable. He had even told Ukiura that he didn't want to win in such a manner against him, and he was devastated when he had seen that he had hurt Uryu in this form. The fundamental problem with Ichigo's perspective is that he sees his inner Hollow as something separate to be controlled rather than something that is a part of himself that he needs to embrace. His rejection of White had weakened him and it had prevented him from gaining full access to his powers, thus making him vulnerable to outside threats. Ichigo's journey to acquiring his full potential couldn't be completed until he had recognized that his inner Hollow wasn't something to fear or dominate, but it was something to accept as a major part of his own soul. If you remember back to one of the first times where Ichigo had entered his inner world, Old Man Zangetsu had stated, "I hate the rain. It rains in this world too. When you're upset, the skies grow cloudy. When you're sad, it rains. I can't stand it. I wonder if you can grasp the terror of being rained on in this lonely world. To be able to hold back the rain, I'll give you everything that I have. Should you place your trust in me, I won't let any rain fall on this world, and believe me, you aren't fighting alone, Ichigo." I believe that while these words had come from Old Man Zangetsu, they could have equally have come from Hollow Ichigo. He too resides within that inner world more so than Old Man Zangetsu, since he is in fact Ichigo's Zanpakuto spirit. Following that full Hollow Vastolore transformation, when Ichigo had entered into his inner world to learn the final Getsuga Tensho, it had rained so much that his entire inner world was submerged underwater. If you remember back to Old Man Zangetsu's speech from volume 13 of Bleach, where he states, "Should you place your trust in me, I won't let any rain fall on this world," you can see Ichigo's complete refusal to place his trust in White has led to his inner world completely flooding. After Ichigo's Zanpakuto was broken following his encounter with Hashward and Yhwach, he had travelled to the royal palace to have it reforged. While there, Uetsu Nimaya delivered the bombshell that the entity which Ichigo had referred to as his inner hollow was in fact his true Zanpakuto spirit. And even more surprising than this, the old man which Ichigo had referred to as Zangetsu from the very beginning, the one who had guided and trained him supposedly, was actually a manifestation of his Quincy powers. This was a fragment of Yhwach himself. This Quincy spirit had been actively suppressing Ichigo's true Shinigami hollow powers out of a desire to protect him from the path of the Shinigami, which Old Man Zangetsu had perceived as dangerous. He eventually confessed, "Every time that you've called Zangetsu till now, you haven't been calling me, the one that you've been calling is him," as he points to White. He states, "I am not Zangetsu, I'm a part of Yhwach that got broken off and stuck inside you." This revelation changes everything that Ichigo had thought that he had known about his powers and his inner world. The power that he feared and rejected was his true Zanpakuto power all along. The entity that he had treated as an enemy had been trying to help him, save him, and teach him. Albeit it was being done in a very harsh way, but it is befitting of the nature of a hollow. White, despite his threatening demeanor, had never lied about who he was. He had explicitly told Ichigo during the Arrancar arc, "I am Zangetsu," but Ichigo refused to believe him. With this revelation comes a new resolve, as Ichigo declares, "I won't ask either of you to lend me your power anymore. I won't tell you to get out of my way either," as he looks at both of them stating, "You are me." This marks Ichigo's full acceptance of every aspect of himself, from his Quincy, Shinigami, Fullbring, and Hollow powers. They are no longer separate entities to be controlled, but they are all a single, unified aspect of his being. When the Asauchi had bowed to Ichigo, this wasn't just a recognition of power, it's an acknowledgement of something much more rarer, which is complete internal harmony. The bow represents Ichigo having achieved what few Shinigami ever do, which is a total acceptance of himself and his powers. Most Shinigami maintain a distinction between themselves and their Zanpakuto, viewing their Zanpakuto as a partner or a tool. They train to hear their Zanpakuto's name initially, as they communicate with the spirit of the Zanpakuto to earn its cooperation. But Ichigo had transcended this entirely with his realization that the blade is me. If something is yours, you don't need to ask it for cooperation, which is why he states he will no longer ask his Zanpakuto for help, because there is no separation. The blade is literally an expression of Ichigo's very own soul. Ichigo no longer sees himself as a Shinigami wielding a Zanpakuto, as he recognizes that the Zanpakuto is not something separate from him, but it is him. This is why the Asauchi bow, as they recognize that Ichigo is someone who has achieved a perfect understanding of what a Zanpakuto truly is. To appreciate the importance of Ichigo's relationship with his Zanpakuto, we need to only look at Renji's journey with Zabimaru. Despite being one of the most determined Shinigami within the Soul Society, Renji had spent decades unable to form a proper bond with his Zanpakuto, which had led to a partial manifestation of his Bankai. As revealed during the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Zabimaru had never fully acknowledged Renji or had shared its true name with him. While Renji believed that he was wielding his true Bankai Hihio Zabimaru, he was in fact fighting with a false version of his Bankai. Ichibei later revealed to him that his Zanpakuto's true form and name is called So'o Zabimaru. This disconnect stemmed from the traditional Zanpakuto Shinigami dynamic, which is one of partnership rather than unity. Renji viewed Zabimaru as something to be mastered and not something that was intrinsically him. We see this mindset in their interactions, as Renji repeatedly had to prove himself worthy to Zabimaru, who itself had appeared as separate entities within his inner world as a monkey and a snake. Even after gaining his true Bankai, Renji's relationship with Zabimaru remains one of mutual respect between two distinct beings. Compare this with Ichigo, who ultimately realizes that there is no separation. He doesn't need to prove himself to another entity, because there is no other. This fundamental difference explains why all of the Asauchi responded so differently to Ichigo in comparison to Renji during their trials with Nimaya. While Renji had to fight and defeat the Asauchi to prove his worth, in traditional Shinigami style, Ichigo received an unprecedented bow of recognition from every single Asauchi present, and this was as a result of him attaining true self-understanding. So yes, while Renji mastered his Zanpakuto and had subdued an Asauchi, Ichigo instead had become one with his Zanpakuto, understanding that the blade is me. This bow here represents the final resolution to the dynamic of the king and the horse. Ichigo is no longer a king riding a rebellious horse. He and the king are now one being, moving with a single purpose and intention. White bows not out of subjugation but out of recognition that Ichigo has finally understood the truth that White had been trying to convey all along. It's a huge difference compared to what he had done during the Vizard training, where he had fought with his inner hollow and had subjugated him. After Ichigo's Zanpakuto is reforged, it physically manifests as two blades representing different aspects of his power. The larger blade embodies his Shinigami and Hollow powers, while the shorter blade represents his Quincy powers. Ichigo's journey does reflect the Jungian concept of integration of the shadow self. White represented Ichigo's shadow, the parts of himself which he had feared and rejected. By recognizing and accepting his shadow rather than treating it as a monster, Ichigo achieves psychological harmony which manifests as greater power and control. So I do hope that this video has helped you to better understand why Hollow Ichigo had bowed to Ichigo and the importance of the blade is me and what it means. Let me know all of your thoughts about this fascinating relationship between White and Ichigo and this metaphor of the king and the horse. If there is anything that I've forgotten to mention, then let me know by continuing the discussion in the comments. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach Explained video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.